In the shadow of Mount Fuji, where cherry blossoms dance on ancient winds, a nation stood at the crossroads of tradition and modernity. Japan in the early 20th century was a land of contradictions, a place where the ancient code of the samurai still whispered through the corridors of power, yet where diplomats in Western suits negotiated the future of empires. This is the story of one such man, a man whose ancestors wielded swords in service to their lords, but who would wield a pen to save thousands of lives. His name was Chiune Sugihara, and in the darkest hour of the 20th century, he would choose humanity over duty, compassion over career, and in doing so, he would light a beacon of hope in a world consumed by hatred. Chiune Sugihara was born in 1899 in the rural town of Kazuche in Japan's Gifu Prefecture. His father, a tax official, dreamed of his son becoming a doctor, a respectable profession that would bring honor to their family. But young Chiune had different plans. Against his father's wishes, Sugihara enrolled in Tokyo Imperial University to study English literature. It was an act of quiet rebellion that would define his character, a willingness to follow his conscience even when it meant disappointing those he loved most. Sugihara's decision to defy his father was quite remarkable for that time. In Japanese society, filial piety was paramount. But even as a young man, Sugihara showed that he would not be bound by expectations when his heart called him elsewhere. After graduation, Sugihara joined the Japanese Foreign Ministry. His first posting was to Harbin in Japanese-controlled Manchuria, where he would spend the next decade learning the intricate dance of international diplomacy. But more importantly, it was here that he would first encounter the Jewish community, Russian Jews who had fled persecution in their homeland. In Harbin, Sugihara witnessed firsthand the resilience of a people who had survived centuries of persecution. He learned their stories, their struggles, their hopes. He even learned to speak Russian and German fluently, skills that would prove crucial in the years to come. But perhaps most importantly, he learned to see beyond nationality and religion to the shared humanity that binds us all. In 1935, Sugihara married Yukiko Kikuchi, a woman whose gentle strength would prove to be his anchor in the storms ahead. Together, they built a life filled with love and laughter. According to Yukiko, her husband was a total softie, who never lost his temper and had difficulty disciplining their children. He was, in every sense, a man of peace, but peace was a luxury the world could not afford. In Germany, a madman with a twisted mustache was rising to power, preaching a gospel of hatred and racial superiority. In 1939, as Europe teetered on the brink of war, the Japanese Foreign Ministry made a fateful decision. They would send their gentle diplomat to Lithuania to open a consulate in the medieval city of Kaunas. Kaunas was a crossroads of cultures, a city where Polish, Lithuanian, Russian, and Jewish communities had coexisted for centuries. It was also a strategic listening post, perfectly positioned to gather intelligence on the Soviet Union's intentions. Sugihara's mission was clear: observe, report, and above all, serve Japan's interests. But on September 1, 1939, everything changed. German tanks rolled across the Polish border, and the world erupted in flames. Within days, Britain and France declared war on Germany. The Second World War had begun. The German invasion sent shock waves across Eastern Europe. Thousands of Jewish refugees, carrying only what they could hold in their arms, fled westward across the Polish border into Lithuania. They brought with them horrifying tales of what the Nazis were doing to their people. Harsh laws that stripped Jews of their rights and property, forced relocations to ghettos, brutal attacks, and mass murders. Their fears proved prophetic. In June 1940, Soviet forces occupied Lithuania. The country that had offered refuge to thousands of Jewish refugees was now under communist rule. The Soviet authorities issued an ultimatum to all foreign diplomatic missions: pack up and leave. As Sugihara prepared to close the Japanese consulate, he discovered something that would change his life forever. Outside his gates, a crowd of Jewish refugees had gathered. They were desperate, terrified, and they had nowhere else to turn. Their leader, a man named Zorak Warhaftig, approached Sugihara with an extraordinary request. The refugees had devised an elaborate escape plan that would take them halfway around the world to safety. A Dutch consul had agreed to stamp their passports with destination visas to Curaçao, a Dutch Caribbean island that didn't require entrance permits. But there was one crucial missing piece. They needed transit visas to travel across the Soviet Union and through Japanese-controlled territory. Sugihara cabled Tokyo immediately, requesting permission to issue the transit visas. The response came back swift and unequivocal: request denied. My husband was deeply troubled. He understood the consequences of disobeying orders. In Japan, loyalty and obedience were sacred values. To defy the government would mean the end of his career, disgrace for our family. But he also understood what would happen to those people if he did nothing. For 3 sleepless nights, Sugihara wrestled with his conscience. On one side stood duty, career, and family security. On the other stood the desperate faces of men, women, and children whose only crime was being born Jewish. In his darkest hour, he remembered an ancient samurai maxim that his ancestors had lived by. Even a hunter cannot kill a bird which flies to him for refuge. On July 18, 1940, Chiune Sugihara made his choice. With a hand that trembled not from fear, but from the weight of moral responsibility, he began to write, visa after visa after visa, each one a lifeline thrown to a drowning soul. What followed was one of the most extraordinary humanitarian efforts in history. For nearly a month, Sugihara worked 18 to 20 hours a day, writing visas by hand. Each visa required careful attention to detail: names, dates, destinations, official stamps, and signatures. There could be no mistakes, for a single error could mean death for the bearer. Word spread quickly through the refugee community. A seemingly endless stream of Jewish families lined up outside the Japanese consulate day and night. Mothers clutching babies, elderly men with prayer books, teenagers who should have been in school, all of them united by fear and sustained by hope. I brought my husband his meals so he wouldn't have to stop writing. His hand would cramp so badly that I had to massage it each night, but he never complained. He would look at me and say, "These people's lives depend on the speed of my pen." I was just a boy when my father took me to the Japanese consulate. I remember the crowd, the tension, the fear in everyone's eyes. And then I remember this gentle Japanese man who smiled at me and handed my father a piece of paper. At the time, I didn't understand what it meant. I only learned later that it meant life. As August drew to a close, the Soviet authorities grew impatient. They ordered Sugihara to vacate the consulate immediately. But even as he packed his belongings, even as the moving trucks waited outside, Sugihara continued to write visas. According to witnesses, Sugihara continued issuing visas even as he traveled to the train station. Through the window of his departing train, he passed visas into the crowd of desperate refugees. Some say that as the train pulled away, he called out, "Please forgive me. I cannot write anymore." In less than a month, Chiune Sugihara had issued over 2,000 handwritten visas, ultimately enabling approximately 6,000 Jewish refugees to escape Nazi-occupied Europe. They traveled eastward by train across the vast expanse of the Soviet Union to Japan, and from there scattered to the 4 corners of the earth, to Shanghai, Australia, America, Palestine, carrying with them the gift of life that a Japanese diplomat had given them. Within a year of Sugihara's departure, Nazi Germany invaded Lithuania. The Jewish community that had thrived there for centuries was systematically destroyed. By the end of the war, 90% of Lithuania's Jews were dead. The number would have been even higher if not for the visas that Sugihara had written in defiance of his government's orders. After Lithuania, Sugihara was reassigned to various Japanese consulates throughout Europe. He served in Berlin, Prague, and Königsberg, all the while carrying the secret knowledge of what he had done. When the war ended, he and his family were captured by Soviet forces and imprisoned in a PW camp for 18 months. When the Sugiharas finally returned to Japan in 1947, they found a country transformed by defeat. The Japan they had known, the Japan of emperors and samurai traditions, was gone forever. And for Chiune Sugihara, there would be one more devastating blow. The Japanese Foreign Ministry dismissed Sugihara from diplomatic service. The official reason was downsizing, but Sugihara knew the truth. He was being punished for his disobedience in Lithuania. His diplomatic career was over. The story of Chiune Sugihara's heroism might have died with him, buried beneath years of silence and shame. But in 1968, 28 years after those desperate days in Lithuania, a Jewish man working at the Israeli embassy in Tokyo began a search that would change everything. I was one of the children who received a Sugihara visa. I never forgot the face of the man who saved my life. When I learned that he might still be alive, I knew I had to find him. I owed him that much. When Nishri finally tracked down Sugihara, the former diplomat was overwhelmed. He had carried the weight of his decision in silence for decades, never knowing if his actions had truly made a difference. Now, face to face with a man whose life he had saved, he finally understood the magnitude of what he had done. In 1984, Yad Vashem, Israel's official memorial to the victims of the Holocaust, bestowed upon Chiune Sugihara its highest honor, recognition as righteous among the nations. This title is awarded only to non-Jews who risked their lives to save Jews during the Holocaust. Eventually, even his own government acknowledged what Sugihara had done. In 1991, the Japanese Foreign Ministry formally apologized for his dismissal and restored his honor posthumously. Today, he is celebrated in Japan as a heroic symbol of humanity and compassion. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Sugihara's story is not the recognition he received, but the legacy he left behind. According to Jewish tradition, whoever saves a single life has saved an entire world. Sugihara didn't just save 6,000 individual lives, he saved 6,000 entire worlds. The people Sugihara saved went on to marry, have children, and build new lives across the globe. They became doctors, teachers, artists, engineers, and parents. By some estimates, there are now more than 40,000 descendants of the original Sugihara visa recipients living around the world today. Chiune Sugihara died in 1986 at the age of 86. He lived to see his actions recognized and celebrated, but more importantly, he lived to see that his choice had mattered. In a world that often seems defined by hatred and division, his story reminds us of a simple but powerful truth: one person can make a difference. In the summer of 1940, faced with an impossible choice between duty and conscience, a gentle Japanese diplomat chose love over law, humanity over hierarchy. He chose to believe that the life of a stranger was worth more than his own comfort and security, and in making that choice, he proved that even in humanity's darkest hour, there is always light to be found if we have the courage to kindle it. The flame of righteousness, once lit, burns eternal, and in its light we find not only the courage to do what is right, but the hope that others will do the same.